Hello, Misfits, and welcome. Today we are talking about 5 things in D&D that just make absolutely no sense. We are specifically talking about 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons, and we're talking about rules as written, base components of the game that just don't make any sense, or at the very least, don't make any sense to me. Perhaps you can judge these for yourself and maybe explain why some of these do make sense, but as far as I've ever considered and come to understand these different things, I have never found them to make a lick of sense. So let's get into them, let's talk about them, and then you can judge for yourself. And of course, let's give the disclaimer that these are just my opinions based off of my own experiences. They are probably going to be different from your opinions, so, take everything with a grain of salt. Let's just all be civil in the comments. So number 1, falling damage. Falling damage in 5th edition Dungeons and Dragons makes absolutely no sense at all. So the way falling damage is done in 5e is if you're calculating the damage, it's a d6 per 10 feet that you fall. The part that doesn't make any sense to me is that it caps out at 20d6. So 20d6 doesn't really make that much sense to me. That's a total of 200 feet, right? So it's almost implying that you're not going to fall further than 200 feet, maybe? I don't know. I think I know where they're trying to derive this from. I think they're trying to derive it from reaching terminal velocity. And I have done some math about that. So, reaching terminal velocity for the average human is 66 meters per second or 216 feet per second. So I think that's where they're trying to get this from, but just the way that the damage ends up being calculated and dealt out, it just doesn't equate to the damage you should receive if you are falling from if you're falling at terminal velocity. It just doesn't make much sense because 20d6, the average for that is 70 points of damage. There are a number of characters, you don't even have to get that high into the levels of play to have a character that can take 70 points of damage and walk away, let alone 70 points of damage and, not be permanently killed outright. In the early levels of play, sure, 70 points of damage or more can certainly totally off you immediately. But once you get to a higher level of play, 70 points is not going to, it's probably not going to permanently kill you. And it probably won't even down you if you're at full health. Normally the way I do falling damage, though it's not necessarily come up in most of my games, but I just don't max out at 20d6. I just keep adding it. I don't know if there's a way to cap it where it would make sense. It's almost like the further you fall, we need to start changing what type of die we're using to calculate the damage maybe, and then reach a cap at some point. I don't know. There are just definitely some problems with this. I see the logic behind it. I see why they've arrived at their conclusion and why they've made the choices they have made. I just think that they don't make much sense. So, falling damage doesn't make a ton of sense to me. Number 2, shields. In 5th edition D&D, there is one type of shield. Just one. And it gives you a +2 to AC. Now, a +2 to AC can be great, but yeah, there's just one type of shield. You want to go to some other place and look for their special fancy shield? No, there's just one shield. It gives you a +2. They all give you a +2. There's just one shield. Just one shield. I find this weird because we know as human beings there's a multitude of shield varieties in the world. You've got the tiny little ones. Aren't they called like bucklers or something? They're very small, and they don't really cause you to sacrifice your mobility in any way. Then you've got like the full like body kind of shield, almost sort of like riot kind of shield situation, and that's going to slow you down, but it's going to cover like your whole body. And then you've got the variety of shields that are somewhere in between those two. But no, in D&D, there's just one. There's just one. I find that so weird. And they've not once tried to, like, fix that? Or have they? Have they tried to fix it and I'm just unaware? Because when I was trying to look things up for this list, I was just seeing the one blanket statement shield type with the +2 AC. If there are other types that are, like, actually like Wizards of the Coast published, let me know. But as far as I could tell, there's just the one, which is crazy. Should we sit down and sort of revamp the way we do shields and create more variety? No, instead, let's just, spend the next like decade or two pumping out a bunch of different subclasses and spells that have varying levels of, testing behind them. And you're going to have to take all of this with a grain of salt. I love 5th edition. I really, really do. It's what I play in. It's what I run. It's basically the only thing that I've really ever played a game in. But that does not mean that it is free of my ire and free of my criticism. I can love it and still be critical of it. So hopefully you can too. Number 3. Religion. Religion in D&D is kind of weird. And this is sort of an iffy one. It's not necessarily like... I don't know if it's laid out in the rules the way that some of these other things are, but religion is handled kind of weird in D&D. So... our D&D worlds are polytheistic. There's a multitude of gods and goddesses and deities that are having an active role in the world and magic and everything. But you will find areas in D&D campaign settings and stuff that just seem super non-religious. You'll encounter large groups of people that aren't overly religious, even though, like, gods are for sure real and have, like, a notable existence and presence in the world, and yet we've got like people that kind of seem non-religious. You'll also encounter like big regions or areas or campaign settings that feel very monotheistic, despite there being a multitude of deities, and I find that weird. Like Curse of Strahd, you walk around Barovia, pretty much the only god anybody ever talks about is the Morning Lord. And that's great. I understand from a writing standpoint how, using the Morning Lord is a great sort of foil to the sort of darkness and lack of light that Strahd and his minions bring. But in a game system that presents a multitude of deities and gods that all sort of oversee varying different domains and aspects of the world, it's weird to just sort of only have one in this big giant place. I find that a little odd. And it also gets a little weird with like clerics or paladins that really only worship one deity, period. Whereas, like, maybe you should be praying to the god that's most applicable to, the struggle you're facing, Maybe if you're trying to bless your friends and try to give them a little bit of a buff or advantage to what they're doing, you might pray to Tamora to sort of grant them a little bit of luck. Or maybe when you're entering battle and you're going to strike and, smite someone, you might pray to someone like Torm or some sort of like war-related god to give you sort of an advantage there, instead of just all the time, every single time, I am only going to pray to Mystra. It's like, Mistra's great, but she might not be super applicable to every single scenario you're in. I don't know. Food for thought. Things to discuss and think about. But I feel like a lot of times the way religion is handled in D&D is a little weird. Maybe because it's created by a bunch of people in a Western society that's not super accustomed to polytheistic religion. I don't know. These are the things that I think about when I am left to my thoughts. Number 4, the spell Find Traps. I don't know if you've read this spell, but it's dumb, and it doesn't make any sense. So, the spell Find Traps, it doesn't actually find the traps. It just kind of tells you if there is one in the area, but it doesn't really give you, like, that many specifics about it, and it doesn't tell you exactly where it is. You still have to, like, go search for traps to actually find the trap. So that's dumb, and that doesn't make any sense. It's a bit deceptive to name it Find Traps when it's not really helping you find the traps. You see what I mean? Maybe they could have renamed it to, like, see if maybe there is a trap somewhere kind of nearby. Or, like, vaguely detect the presence of traps. Yes, that's my spell. I would like to cast Vaguely Detect the Presence of Traps, and then you find out if there vaguely may be a trap somewhat nearby, and then you can go look for it. I don't know. Seems kind of dumb to me, personally. All right, number 5, advantage and disadvantage. The way they're handled in 5th edition D&D is they cancel each other out 100% of the time. If you're going to make some sort of roll and you would have advantage on that roll, and something has happened to you or something that has given you disadvantage, then the advantage and the disadvantage absolutely cancel each other out. Now, there are a multitude of scenarios in which that makes perfect sense, where the advantage and the disadvantage would cancel them each other out, and you would be rolling straight. However, there are also several scenarios in which advantage and disadvantage canceling each other out doesn't make any sense at all. I was reading about on, like, a Reddit thread, and this person was laying out an example, and they described 2 archers that are, like, outside their sort of range increment, and so they're shooting at disadvantage because they're too far away from each other. However, they're both blind, so if you in D&D attack somebody that is blind, you get advantage against them because they can't see you to know how to, like, I don't know, dodge or protect themselves from you. So because they're far away from each other, they're at disadvantage. Because they're both blind, they have advantage on each other, so then it's just a straight roll. That doesn't make any sense. Like, that doesn't make a lot of sense. And that's just one example. There are several other examples out there of advantage and disadvantage canceling each other out in ways that just seem sort of weird, and sometimes I question whether or not it makes sense that advantage and disadvantage doesn't stack. There are scenarios in which I just think, does that perfectly make sense? I don't know. I don't know if that's exactly how that would work out, Things like that. It's like, I understand. We're trying to take all of this and turn it into a game system that we can follow and have rules and guidelines to kind of streamline it all. And so we can't necessarily account for every single scenario, but there are going to be these gaps in these little areas where the rules that we've come up with don't seem to perfectly line up. And this is why pretty much every, like, tabletop RPG kind of game is going to have that caveat at the beginning that's like, hey, you're in charge, you can throw the rulebook out the window when it seems to suit you best. Like, you ultimately call the shots, you can make changes to this where you see fit. And so these are 5 things that didn't make any sense to me that I would personally probably change or handle differently depending on the scenario. But I wanted to share them with you because I think it's fun to pick things apart sometimes and look at things with a little bit of a critical gaze, but in the spirit of fun and enjoyment. So if you enjoyed this video, found any of this useful or funny or agreed or disagreed, please feel free to like and subscribe. That stuff really does help me out. But what really helps me out the most is commenting. Talk to me down below. Talk about other things that don't make sense in raw D&D. Tell me about things on this list that you're like, no, that does make sense, and here's why. Tell me about it. You know, let's have some nice discourse in the comments below. And also, if you've got like ideas for topics you want me to cover or things that you want to hear my opinion on, tell me about those down below and help me get some ideas for some future videos, stuff like that. But with all of that said and done, I hope you guys have a great rest of your day, a great rest of your week, and I will see you again next time. It is good to actually sit down and have one of these sort of like post-video chats. It's been a while since I've been able to do one of those, and I've missed it a little bit. I like getting to just sort of chat with you guys. Those that keep up with like sort of the community tab of this channel know that I have been somewhat injured. Basically, I threw my back out, which is crazy because I'm still in my 20s, though barely, but you are never too young to feel super old. So yeah, I basically threw my back out. It was dumb. Lift with your legs, not your back. That's the most I can tell you. But I am much better now. Today is like the first day that just existing doesn't hurt, so that's nice. We've entered the spring. As for us teachers out there, we're sort of in the, or at least teachers in the US, we're in that sort of late spring kind of sprint to the finish kind of zone of school. We really only have like kind of like 2 months left of school, and my eye is on the finish line, and really the only goal is to end in one piece and have your mental sanity intact. But in my years of experience, you can only choose one, you cannot have both, so we'll see which one I end up with come late May. But so far so good. I recently just had like a big sort of like performance choral festival thing, because that's what I teach. I teach choir, and we had to do this big performance, and I had a big first for me as a choir teacher. One of my kids lost a tooth while we were about to go on stage. So that was fun. Never had that experience before, but those are the things you deal with when you teach kids. But it was all good. The kid was a champ about it. But yeah, I do want to just sort of push a little bit the skit sort of video that I did recently. It was a lot of fun. I clearly had a blast making it. And I think the little like short snippets that I've cut out and posted around have been doing really, really well. But go check out the full length video, because I do think the full thing is funnier than the shorts. And I can't cut all of it into shorts because then you would not have the context to get all of the jokes. So go check it out. It was a blast. And if you like that sort of thing, tell me about it, so that I will know that I should make more things like that. But yeah, hope you guys have a great day.